Friends, please pray with me. Oh God, may your word be in my mouth. May your spirit be in our hearts. May you open our minds, our ears, our lives to hear your word for us this day. Amen. Please be seated. I should begin by introducing myself. My name is Jordan Cantwell. I use she or they pronouns. I come from Treaty 6 territory in Canada. And Treaty 6 covers a whole vast area. The particular place within Treaty 6 that I live is the traditional territory of the Nehiyaw, the Cree people. It's also part of the Métis homeland. And I am honored and humbled to be here on Tongva territory. And I want to acknowledge and honor the Tongva elders and the people who are the original stewards of this land. In Matthew's gospel, Jesus, in this particular passage, I think is a little over the top. If your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out, throw it away, cut off your hand, toss it away. Like, seriously, Jesus. Not literally, obviously. So then why say it? Like, if what you mean, Jesus, is if there's some part of your life or something that you're doing or some way you're looking at the world that is breaking relationship with God, with your neighbors, with the earth, with yourself, cut it out. Stop doing it. Put it down. That would have worked. He could have said that and we'd have been like, oh, that's a good idea. We should stop doing that. But he doesn't. He gets all graphic and grotesque. And I thought that was unnecessary. A number of years back in Canada, the indigenous people of Canada said very clearly to our nation and to our churches, you need to reckon with the history that you don't want to know about here in Canada. You need to contend with colonialism. And you need in particular to learn about the history of residential schools in this country and to take responsibility for what you have done and for what you are doing. Now, the churches and the nation didn't just say, oh, that's a super idea. Tell us what happened. We're all ears. What the indigenous people had to do is say, we're suing you. We're suing Canada, and we're suing the churches who ran these schools. And the churches did the math and very quickly realized this would lead to total bankruptcy. So they said, what if instead we were to talk together and we were to listen and we were to actually together find a path towards right relationship? And so the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was born. Now, here's what I need to tell you before any of this will make sense. The United Church of Canada, the denomination that I am part of, prides itself, literally prides itself, on being the justice church of Canada. We're the ones who, before any of the other denominations in Canada were welcoming and ordaining LGBTQI2A+ folks, we're like, come on in. You're with us. We'll ordain you. We'll commission you. We'll marry you. We're first. And our identity is totally caught up in the we're first. We get there first. And everybody else, all the other churches, they're learning from us. And eventually, if they're paying attention, they'll catch up. Because we got the gospel in spades. So the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the truths that were told there about the residential school system is utterly devastating for those of us who had built our identity as the ones who knew how to live the gospel. Because the residential schools, here for a quick history lesson, Canada had an Indian problem as they put it. The problem was that there were Indians and that they were on the land that Canada wanted. And so they had all kinds of, and y'all know about this because our histories aren't that different, all kinds of strategies for getting that land, but the indigenous people wouldn't go away. So then they developed a system of residential schools, the express purpose of which was to kill the Indian in the child. And the strategy was to go into indigenous communities, scoop up all of the children, and cart them off to residential schools run by the churches. The Anglican Church, your sisters and brothers and siblings in Canada, the United Church, the Methodist Church, the Presbyterian Church, and the Catholic Church ran these schools on behalf of the state. They were places where indigenous children were stripped of their identity, their names were taken away, their hair was cut off, they were not allowed to speak their language, they would be beaten if they spoke their language, they would be beaten if they practiced their culture, and they were taught to be good white people, which of course we all knew they could never be. So they would be lesser white people, but it would be better than being an Indian. That's honestly the belief system underpinning the residential schools. They were places of horrific abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, obviously spiritual and cultural abuse. They were founded on spiritual and cultural abuse. Children starved to death there. Children died. We don't even know how many children died because, of course, that got covered up. But lots of children never made it home again. And the ones who did make it back home were so scarred, and their families were so scarred, that the legacy of these schools is with us to this day. Now, all of this sounds like it'd be something that would be way in our past, but the very last residential school in Canada closed in 1993. I grew up mostly in Canada, from grade 2 to grade 12, while these schools were running. Didn't know a thing about them. Never heard a word. I had no idea. Which is why indigenous people in Canada said, you need to know the history here because you cannot understand today if you don't know what happened in the past. You can't make sense of what's happening now if you don't know your history. And this is our history. So, for me, and for the United Church of Canada, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was absolutely devastating to our self-perception, our identity, who we thought we were, what we believed about ourselves, because we ran these schools. We harmed these children, these families, these communities. And when the schools closed, we were right in there with the next program, which was to adopt indigenous children out of their families. So we're not going to take them out and put them in school anymore. We'll take them out and put them in white families. We can get it done one way or the other. And today there are actually more indigenous children in foster care in Canada than ever went through residential schools. So it's not a thing of the past. In light of the experience of hearing the stories and learning the truth of residential schools and the whole colonial project, which is ongoing, starts to make a little more sense to me why Jesus uses the kind of language that he does. Because hard truths, we want to soften them. We want to make them not as hard as they are. And so I think if he had just said, stop doing the stuff that's unhelpful, might not have got the message. But when he says, it's going to be like this. It's going to be like reaching and taking your eyeball and ripping it out. That's what it's going to feel like to do this work. It's going to feel like sawing off your right hand and throwing it away into the dust. This is not easy stuff to do, and nobody does it because they feel like it. We do it because our lives depend on it. Because we can't be whole. We can't enter life unless we do it. I thought, hearing the stories of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the stories of residential school, the pain of indigenous people, I thought that was the cutting of the hand. It felt like like my eyeballs were being ripped out because I didn't even know how to look at myself anymore. I didn't know how to look at my church or my country. But that was actually not the chopping of the hand. That was simply the coming to awareness that the hand was gangrenous. That was simply the process of learning that I didn't know how to see because my eyes were all messed up. The cutting, the removing still has to happen. Now, if the TRC was hard for our church, let me tell you how hard this part is. Because what we're hearing from our indigenous relatives is that they're not actually interested in our endless apologies. Like, we've apologized. And so most of us in the church, we kind of feel like, well, we heard, we listened, we got it. We feel rotten. And we are sorry. We are deeply sorry, and we've said so. And now, can we move on, please? Because, that's behind us, thank goodness. And now we just want to be friends together. And indigenous folks are saying, well, we don't actually want you to keep on apologizing. We want you to stop doing what you need to apologize for. We want you to actually change your behavior. We want you to make things right. And making things right means reparations. Now, I hunch that word resonates with all of you in a way that it resonates with all of us. For those of us with skin like mine, it's often like a, uh-oh. Could we go back to just the I'm sorry part? But we can't. Jesus actually talks about that in the same scripture. He says, you're on your way to court with somebody who's got something against you. Better make up now. Better sort that out on your way there. Because when you get to the court, you are going to be fully accountable. Fully accountable. So make things right now. That's what reparations is. It's making things right. And I don't get to decide what that looks like. That for me is part of that hard work of cutting off my hand, of pulling out my eye. It's about removing my assumption of privilege and control. That I get to be the one who decides what the program looks like. Me and my people. We'll lay out the map and then we'll show you how to follow it. Nuh-uh. I have to tell you, as hard as it is to hear the stories that are shared by indigenous peoples in our country, it is so much harder to put down my own privilege, to say I can't operate like that anymore. And frankly, I don't want to do it. I mean, I do want to do it, but I don't want to do it. I want to be free of it, but I kind of want to have it too. And that's why I think Moses says to the Israelites, he says, you have a choice. You have life and you have death, and you have to choose one. You can't have them both. And Jesus says, you can go through your life with your poisonous hand and your distorted eye, but you can't really live. You can't carry around death in your body and in your way of being and be fully alive. I can't be equal and be better than. I can't be on an equal footing and be the one in control. It sounds like a horror story to cut off your hand, cast away your eye. But listen to what Jesus says. He says, better to do that to lose that part of you that is killing you and to enter life without it than to hang on to it, thinking that you can live with it, because you can't. You can't. And it has taken me most of my life to understand that my privilege and let's just say my privilege and everything that goes with it is killing me. It is dehumanizing me as much as it is dehumanizing others. And that I need healing from colonialism, that I need healing from racism, that I need healing from all of those things that break relationship with my neighbors, with the earth, with God. When I was in my early 20s, I was in South Africa and saw a poster in the church offices that was a quote from an indigenous woman in Australia, Lila Watson, said, "If you've come to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you've come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together." That was about 30 years ago I saw that. I am starting to understand what it means. I'm starting to understand that I am in need of liberation. And that when I do this work, when I do anti-racism work, when I do reconciliation work with indigenous communities, it's not for them. It can't be for them. It's because I cannot be whole. I cannot be human if I'm not doing this work. Otherwise, I'm carrying around a gangrenous hand. I have a distorted view of the world, of myself, of others, that poisons everything I do and think. I can't live like that. Literally can't live like that. That's what Jesus is trying to say. But he says, here's the good news. Not only can you just cut it off and you live, he says it gets better than that. Here's what you get to do. You get to die. You need to die. You have to die. The thing that you are hanging on to, that you are absolutely certain is essential for your life, to preserve your identity, the stuff you cannot imagine living without. My comfort, my security, my place, my status, my whatever it is. Until I can die to that, I cannot embrace or receive the life that God intends. And once I start to get that, then I don't want that stuff anymore. I don't want something that means that my neighbors feel they can't trust me. I don't want to be in the world in a way where some are dehumanized by my actions, by my attitudes. I don't want that. And the thing is, I don't even know how to stop doing that except in community together. I need the healing of community in order to be whole myself. We're given a choice. It's a very simple choice. Seems like a pretty obvious choice. Life or death. It's one of the hardest choices we'll ever make, because what feels like choosing life often feels like death. But that is the central truth of the Christian story. I think Jesus can be trusted on this one. What looks like, what feels like, what in many ways is death, is the path to resurrection. It is the path to life. We get to make that choice. May God grant us the courage and the humility to choose life. Amen.